Tonight, a WISN 12 Commitment 2016 special, a conversation with the candidates for Milwaukee mayor. Milwaukee is home to Fortune 500 companies, a downtown construction boom, and neighborhoods in the midst of a renaissance. But there are persistent problems: violent crime, abject poverty, and urban decay. Tonight, the candidates address the city's needs, challenges, and issues. Mayor Tom Barrett, first elected in 2004, is seeking his fourth term. Alderman Bob Donovan, on the Common Council since 2000, is making his first run for mayor. And now, live from the Marquette University Law School, here is tonight's moderator, WISN 12 News political analyst and upfront host, Mike Boucher.
And good evening, everyone, and welcome to our conversation with the candidates. We're joining you live tonight from Eckstein Hall at Marquette University Law School, where I also work as a fellow in law and public policy. This is our second in a series of live debates leading up to the April 5th election. Tonight, we have the candidates for Milwaukee mayor, incumbent Tom Barrett and his challenger, Alderman Bob Donovan. Barrett and Donovan were the top two finishers in the February primary, Barrett getting 46% of the vote, Donovan with 33%. Our rules for this hour are pretty simple. I'll be asking the candidates questions about their views, their ideas, and their vision for the city. I'll ask them to answer those questions directly and concisely and to stay on point. The candidates can certainly talk to one another, but I'll manage the time on any given topic, and we'll have the freedom to move the conversation along. Toward the end of the hour, each candidate will be asked to make a closing statement. We have a lot to talk about tonight, and we will begin with Mayor Tom Barrett. And actually, the same question will be asked of both of our candidates tonight. Mayor, good to have you with us. Alderman Donovan, too. Let's talk about the state of the city. How is Milwaukee doing in 2016?
In 2016, in fact, at the end of 2015, there were more Milwaukee residents who had jobs than at any point year-end since 2001. More Milwaukee residents had jobs at any point since the end of 2001. That's the good news. We know there's a serious poverty problem, still, even with those amount of residents working, which is exactly why we tackled health care and why we got so many people signing up for health care. But we know that there are challenges in the neighborhoods. The downtown, there's a lot going on in the heart of the city. And I love being the cheerleader for all the good things that are going on in the heart of the city. If you look at Northwestern Mutual, the great work that it's doing, not with just one building, two buildings, the Ergens building, we're going to see a new arena, 1,700 housing units in the pipeline for construction. And if you go south on First Street, you'll see 3 different construction projects between here and Greenfield. So there's a lot going on. We need to get that momentum into the neighborhoods. And we're seeing signs of that. For example, if you go over to the old Talgo site, over in Century City, the old A.L. Smith site, we've got several dozen people who are assembling the glass for the Northwestern Mutual Tower, because Northwestern Mutual has done such a great job in reaching out and getting people involved. So again, the heart of the city, great, great, great. We need to spread that to the rest of the city as well.
Alderman Donovan, what's your assessment of the state of the city?
Well, it's certainly, I would have a different one from the mayor. Certainly the downtown is doing well. But there's more to Milwaukee than just our downtown. And we have seen some horrendous issues going on in our neighborhoods, like crime, like the unemployment rate in certain neighborhoods that is 29% or more, when the rest of Wisconsin is 5%. And that has gone on for years, Mike. That's the concern of mine. After 12 years, we ought to be moving in a more productive way and addressing these nagging problems. And crime, violent crime, since the mayor took office, has gone up 99% since 2004 to current. 99%. That's horrendous. Where's the plan to address those things? So while there are positives going on in Milwaukee, what's holding us back are these negatives that just haven't been effectively dealt with for years.
Let me follow up on each of your opening remarks here. Mayor Barrett, Alderman Donovan and your critics say that homicides last year, 145 of them in Milwaukee, the highest number since 1993. We just saw a study by the Economic Opportunity Group A study that says we're the 7th most economically distressed city in America. Property taxes here in this city are high compared to other comparable cities. Given that, why do you deserve another 4 years in office?
Well, I think we've made some progress, and I'm proud of the progress that we have made, and we're going to continue to make more progress in many of these areas. As I mentioned, we're seeing more Milwaukeeans working, and that's good. Alderman Donovan talked about the neighborhoods. I agree that the neighborhoods need some issues, and the last 3 budgets, I put over $10 million each year into helping us reduce the foreclosure crisis that we have in this community. Unfortunately, Alderman Davis didn't support that 2 of the 3 years. So he's critical, but then when you're saying, well, what are you doing to help, nothing's happening. And in terms of the crime, yeah, you're correct. We had an increase in homicides last year, just as we did in many cities nationally. But prior to that, we had 4 of the 6 lowest homicide years that we had seen in a generation. Now, some of this has to do with people who are doing things wrong. Some of it has to do with access to guns. And we disagree on that because I think that we have to do more to make sure that criminals are not getting their hands on guns. And, for example, we had 6 Milwaukee police officers. 6 Milwaukee police officers who were all shot in about a 22-month period with guns purchased from Badger Guns. I supported the lawsuit against them so that they would no longer sell those guns, basically selling guns to girlfriends of people who are committing crimes. Alderman Donovan never said a word about that because the NRA is saying, we don't want you to talk about that. And so you've got more guns. You've got a legislature that's trying to loosen up the gun laws. Alderman Donovan doesn't say a word about that. So I feel as though I'm fighting a tide of a state government that's hostile to us. I feel like we're fighting more guns. Our police officers are doing a very, very good job getting guns off the street. We need more help than that, though.
I want to talk about your crime plan in a moment, but I do want to follow up on something you said. And you essentially are arguing, Alderman, that it's time for a change. But your critics say Bob Donovan is not the change we need in Milwaukee. You've got some people, even on the Common Council.
I don't know who you're talking to. I mean, I'm not hearing that, Mike.
There's some people on the Common Council who prefer to remain nameless, who say that he's not the most collaborative guy in the world. He's a bit of a grandstander. And the Barrett campaign kind of doubled down on that. They're running a tough radio ad against you right now that says you have Scott Walker's ideas and Donald Trump's temperament, that you have an erratic and unsteady pattern of behavior. And they say you would be a disaster for Milwaukee. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, the connection to Donald Trump, I deplore because I've got far better hair than Donald Trump, okay? Having said that, I'm glad you brought this up, Mike, because the mayor has gone really, really nasty in his radio ads against me, and I want to publicly thank you, Tom, because the phone has been ringing off the hook. We're bringing in more money in my campaign than we were before because of your attack. So by God, keep it up. You're doing a great job. So what was your question?
It's about temperament. It's about behavior. It's about whether you're the guy to lead this city for the next 4 years.
I believe I am the absolute right guy and have the absolute best temperament to be mayor of the city of Milwaukee in 2016 to deal with the real challenges that are impacting Milwaukee. And I say I have the best temperament because I'm not a politician. I'm not a career politician.
You've been in politics a fair amount of years for not being a career politician.
For 16 years, not 32 like my opponent, okay? For 16 years. Most of my life I worked in the private sector. So I don't play politics. I really don't. My interest is in solving problems and standing up and facing those problems head on, and not dancing around particular issues. And yes, sometimes I'm very outspoken on things I believe. I think that's important for a mayor to take stands, sometimes difficult.
Mayor, it is a tough ad that you're running. Why are you running the ad? And what do you mean by erratic, unsteady behavior?
Well, let me go right to that, if I might, Mike. And I'm going to tell you a real story. Bob's heard me tell this story before because I've told it on the campaign trail. This is a job interview. That's what we're going through here tonight. And I think it's important for the people of Milwaukee to understand how we act when the cameras aren't running. And this is an absolute true story. This is in 2007. And jobs is, I've said from day one, jobs, jobs, jobs. We have to have more jobs in this community. We need jobs for low-income people. We need transitional jobs. And we focus like a laser beam on trying to get more jobs in the city. So we had an employer, By Seasons. It's a company, a local company, makes Halloween costumes. So it's a seasonal company. And so the people are working essentially from April to October. They were all set, and I mean all set, to move into the valley. And they came to my office. They had the check for the land in their pocket. But they were concerned because the local alderman, Alderman Donovan, had not been supportive. And I'm listening to them, and I'm thinking this is a total no-brainer. I'm bringing jobs to Alderman Donovan's district. These are people who need to get in the workforce. And we said, don't worry about this. We'll call down to his office. We'll have you go down there and talk to him. We made the call. They went down there. Half hour later, they came back, and they said, we're going to New Berlin. I said, you're going to New Berlin? And they said, he was so abusive to us, we're not going to do this. And in their press release, they said they were going to go to New Berlin because of the toxic political environment in Milwaukee. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I call erratic behavior. You can't have that type of behavior when you've got someone who wants to bring jobs. Now, Alderman Donovan has said, well, I wanted the jobs, I just didn't want them there. But we're dealing in the real world here. And when I say we're dealing with the real world, imagine a businessman who's making $1 million decision, and he comes into your office, and you just say, well, I don't like it there. Go back and do something else. Well, what they did is they left the city. We cannot afford in this city to have a mayor who's going to turn jobs away like he did.
Alderman Donovan, your response.
Let me respond to that. Thank you, Mike. Okay, first of all, the mayor, you were not in that meeting, so you don't know what goes on. Having said that, By Seasons, I never opposed By Seasons coming into the city of Milwaukee, never. They were looking at this property in the valley. They would have taken a lot of land in the valley, which I might add has all been filled in by good-paying, full-time jobs currently. Having said that, they were offering $8 an hour part-time seasonal jobs. Okay. The point is that I was opposing it only because of the experts from the Department of City Development who worked full-time on the valley. Yes, Tom, they were advising me this was not the best fit for the valley because of all the millions and millions and millions of dollars that went into revitalizing the valley, that the desire was for full-time, good-paying jobs to move in there. That was the intent. So, and I might add, and Tom never mentions this, and shame on you, I was joined in this opposition by Gwen Moore. But he never mentions her opposition to it. He never mentions the experts from DCD who were against it as well. But it was me. So having said that,
Let me just say, DCD brought it to me. DCD brought the proposal to me.
The commissioner did.
Yeah.
You're appointed commissioner, Tom.
But again, I think the point is, yes, you can disagree, and we all disagree. And just yesterday, I had a businessman who has known Bob for years who called me on this very issue out of the blue, and said that he had called Alderman Donovan on this issue, and Alderman Donovan said, "You don't live in my district," and hung up on him. Again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to fight to get jobs in this city. And temperament plays a role in this. You have to have a temperament so that people understand, even if you disagree, you want to continue to work with them.
Did you hang up on him?
I don't know what he's talking about or who that person is. Having said that, anyone, Mike, who knows me and how I operate, my office has the best constituent relations in the city. And I don't hang up on people and I especially don't say, no, you're not a constituent of mine. We take calls from across the city. We do.
Let me go back to some of the themes that were sounded at the beginning of this, and I want to talk a bit more about the crime issue, because you said you have a plan for dealing with it, Alderman, and that plan, as I understand it, is to hire another 250 or 300 Milwaukee police officers. It's a lot of positions. How are you going to pay for it?
Well, I will tell you, we will find the money. This is a $1.5+ billion budget, the city of Milwaukee's budget, $1.5 billion. To find that extra $15 million in there is doable, but it requires management, it requires setting priorities and deciding what is most important. And why I have emphasized over the years, Mike, the importance of safety. Without safety, nothing really positive can occur. Without maintaining order and stability in our neighborhoods and on our streets. So yes, that's important, especially if we want to adopt the broken windows approach to policing. You need the beat cops. I'm a big believer in foot and bicycle patrols in the neighborhoods. Those officers getting to know the people that they're protecting. And I might add, there is absolutely no better way to improve police-community relations than by doing that.
Mayor Barrett says he wants to hire 250, 300 officers. Can you do that?
I was still waiting for him to say where the $15 million was going to come from.
It's in the budget.
So what's going to get cut?
I'll find it.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure.
$1,500 million. $1,500 million, and you can't find $15 million?
If it's easy to find, I'm just saying I think the public needs to know where it is, because I don't want to cut libraries. I don't want to cut public health. I don't want to cut sanitation. I don't want to cut the fire department. So I think it's fair if you're saying you're going to add 250, 300 cops to say, well, this is how I'm going to pay for them. I think that's we're looking for some transparency in government here. I would love to hire more police officers, but right now, 59% of our operating budget for this city goes to the police and fire department. If you look at what the police budget was when I came in, it was probably $180 million. It's now $248 million. So it's gone up significantly, the largest increase of any department in this state. So what's the problem? The problem is we have continuously gotten fewer dollars from Madison for the shared revenue program. When I came in, the shared revenue program essentially gave us enough money to pay for the police department and the fire department. Now it doesn't even cover the cost of the police department. So we went through the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, and unlike many major American cities, under my leadership, we did not lay off a single police officer, we did not lay off a single firefighter, we didn't close a single library. That's pretty amazing when you look at that. So we've maintained strength. We're down maybe 40, but we've civilianized a number of positions. But I've spoken out in favor of getting federal dollars for this. State dollars, I certainly will fight for that. That's how we got money for the spot shotter. But when we're going up against the cuts in Madison, Bob is silent. And I am going to fight for this city to get the resources that we need, because that's the job the mayor needs to do.
Alderman Donovan, you respond to his comment that you've been silent.
Yeah. Well, I haven't been silent. Name another alderman that has been vocal on almost every issue impacting Milwaukee.
But trying to get more shared revenue, I think, is the point.
I would love to have more shared revenue. I think we all would. We have to work within whatever parameters are going on. Yes, I would love. I'm making a public call to the legislature and the governor right now. Send more money to Milwaukee. It's not happening that way, Tom. Okay? It's not. And you stand up and you scream at the governor, or you do this or that, and you call it fighting for Milwaukee, but we're not getting the job done. Okay? You're not being successful in restoring the same number of officers that this city had in 2008. We're hundreds short. And
we are not hundreds short.
We are hundreds short, no. Tom. And there he goes again. You know, he just, no, and whatever he says is absolutely correct. PolitiFact, check that out, will you?
Final.
Well, let me, because you mentioned police community relations, and right. I think this is another important issue for us to discuss when Bob's talking about standing up to Madison. And this is an incredibly serious issue, residency. For 75 years, this community had as a condition of employment that if you were a public employee, you would reside in the city. Or as I describe people who complain about it, when they say you have to live in the city, I say, no. you get to live in the city. You get a good middle-class job with good health care benefits, with a good pension, and you get to live in the city of Milwaukee that I love. I love the city. 75 years. Then came this legislature and this governor, and they repealed it. I asked all the aldermen to join me in writing a letter to the governor not to support this. Every single elected official, other than Alderman Donovan, joined in that letter. He didn't fight for Milwaukee there. He did not fight for Milwaukee. Then, when we lost at the trial court level and wanted to appeal it, the council, on a 13-2 vote, voted to support the appeal. He didn't support it. We won unanimously at the Court of Appeals level. Now it's before the Supreme Court. But let me explain to you why this is important. And I'm not trying to dominate this, but this is so important.
I'll get back to him here.
We have literally thousands of people who are applying for those jobs, for the police officer and firefighter jobs. I understand some people don't want to live in the city. I'm saying if you don't want to live in the city, you don't have to live in the city, because I know I've got thousands of people who want to take that job. Great, go be a police officer in McGuanago. But when you talk about police-community relations, in Baltimore, where last summer we saw horrendous riots, 79% of the police officers don't live in the city of Baltimore. In Ferguson, Missouri, a majority of those police officers do not live in the city of Ferguson. In a city that's as racially divided or balanced as we are, we have to have our public safety officers as part of our community. He's fighting for the people who want to move out. I'm fighting for the people who want to stay here.
Let me have you address that, Alderman. Yeah.
That's just not true. I have never opposed and have never had a problem with requiring city employees to live in the city of Milwaukee. Never.
If you were mayor, would you be fighting for this right now to maintain the residency requirement?
I am not. It's in the courts. So it's a moot point.
No.
It's in the courts, okay? So, you know, the point I want to make is this, and I have said from day one, a lot of employees want to move out of the city, or some that do, usually it's regarding MPS, or they're concerned one way or another in sending their kids to school. I have advocated for years improvements in MPS that need to take place for us to be a more competitive city. But regarding, you know, this issue, I've never been opposed to residency, but we have to put our efforts into making this city a city that everyone wants to live in, as opposed to forcing them to live in. And the mayor has created such animosity between some of these unions, he won't even talk to them. And they wanted to sit down with the mayor and discuss this issue. He could have negotiated some kind of better arrangement than how this may all end up in the courts. So those opportunities were dropped because of his unwillingness to sit down and talk about the issue. That's important.
I know you want to jump in on this, but I do want to move on to other topics.
It's your show.
Yeah, thank you. I want to talk to you a little bit about the downtown construction boom. I know you feel strongly, Alderman, that crime is job one, reducing crime is job one, and you made some reference earlier that, you know, sure, downtown's doing well, but what about the rest of the city? But let me ask you about downtown. About $5 billion in construction in downtown since 2005 during the mayor's tenure. You talk about the city's kind of going to pot. Why are businesses investing so heavily in downtown? Why are people deciding to move downtown if the city is going in the dumps?
Well, I'm not saying the city is going in the dumps. I'm saying certain things in our neighborhoods that haven't been addressed for years. Our downtown is a great downtown. We sit on the shores of one of the world's greatest natural resources, although half the time you can't swim in it. There's a problem with that. That needs to be addressed. But having said that, we've got a great downtown. And I might add, a relatively safe downtown, too. The mayor has put all of his efforts into the downtown and in the process neglecting our neighborhoods. So it's wonderful, the things that are going on. I might add, Tom, all of this, and no streetcar's been built. Can you imagine? How did that happen without a streetcar?
Yeah.
We don't need a streetcar.
That will
okay?
come up a little bit
Good.
later
I
in
hope
this,
so.
in this
Thank you.
discussion.
Thank you.
Respond to that. The argument that you hear, Mayor, is that the downtown, sure, things are going well. There's this new investment. That's great. But it is at the expense of the neighborhoods that have received less attention. You touched on that earlier, but deal with that.
My mother had a saying when I was growing up that a mother is only as happy as her unhappiest child. I have 4 children, so I have an understanding of what she meant when she said. Any parent here knows what she meant when she said that. Being mayor is really pretty similar to that. Again, I couldn't be prouder of the progress we've made in the heart of the city. And it's not just downtown. You look at the 3rd Ward, you look at the 5th Ward, you look at the area going north. There's a lot going on. The old Pabst location, the Menominee Valley, is exploding in a positive way. Of course I'm concerned about the areas where there's too much poverty. And you mentioned that study that had us as the 7th most distressed city. I don't need a New York Times subscription to know that. I see that all the time. I see it all the time. I see the poverty, and that's why we're focusing on getting people jobs. That's why we're focusing on the foreclosure crisis. That's why we're focusing on rebuilding. I have a vision to rebuild the neighborhood library system. That's a $20 million vision, and we're implementing it. We did it with Villard Square. We did it with the East Library on North Avenue. We did it with Tippecanoe on the south side. We're going to do it with Forest Home. We're going around the city because the neighborhoods are part of this. They're part of the fabric of the neighborhoods. And I believe in the neighborhoods. We're putting over $30 million into the foreclosure crisis. We got $30 million from the federal government to rebuild the area out at West Lawn. So my political roots are in the neighborhoods. And so of course I'm going to be focusing on the neighborhood.
Do you understand why some people are impatient, Mayor? You've been in office 12 years, and they say, here's the number of households living in poverty. It's 29%. We have pockets of unemployment in this city, maybe as high as 50% for African-American men. Do you understand why people are impatient?
Absolutely. I feel it every single day. I get up every day. And I will tell you this when you mentioned the number, the 50% number, because I talked to Mark Levine. He was the one who had that number initially. And he just said that number has now dropped by double digits for African-American male joblessness. Now, that's still, we have a long, long way to go. But that's why we focus on Century City. That's why we focused on the Valley. I'd like to have more allies. I'd like to have Bob helping me with this and not sending out press release after press release about what a terrible city this is.
Alderman Donovan, what would you do to address some of the metrics that I just mentioned? The fact that we have too many people who don't have a high school degree, too many people don't have a job, too many people who live in poverty. Yeah. Specifically, what would you do to address that?
First of all, let me say this. If I had $1 for every time the mayor says I get up every morning and think of ways that we're going to improve Milwaukee, we could hire the 300 cops that you've gotten rid of since 2008. But having said that, I, as mayor, one of the first and most important things that as mayor I would bring to the table, Mike, is a sense of urgency to tackle these issues like education that is really never talked about by this administration, yet is so critical to Milwaukee moving forward. Talk about and attracting jobs. I would create a jobs ambassador position without raising, without changing the mayor's budget, but working directly out of my office as mayor, whose job it would be to go around this country and attract businesses, not to steal one from West Dallas and put them in the Menominee Valley and call that a victory.
Forgive me for 1 second, but how would that be any different than having the M7, the Regional Economic Development Group that does that, or the MMAC, the Association of Commerce that does that, or the Commissioner of Economic Development for the city? How would that be any different?
I don't know that they're doing a lot of that successfully. They certainly aren't doing it successfully. I, am interested in the bottom line and getting things done and tackling these issues that have long been ignored. So I believe we could get that job done and address some of the terrible, horrendous problems going on in zip codes like 53206 and the unemployment, the hopelessness, the crime, all of these things that have just leveled some of our neighborhoods dramatically.
Mayor?
Alderman Donovan said he wanted to do this with a sense of urgency. He's been an alderman 16 years, I think about half of your professional career. What I've said is I'm not going to make an issue out of the fact that he's served in city government longer than I have. But let's talk about his sense of urgency. Last year, he introduced, I think it was 12 measures, ordinances or resolutions. 8 of those had to do with ordinary land transfers, so those were really at the request of the administration. So you introduced, I think it was 4 or 5 measures. I don't know if any of those were enacted. And I've gotten 2 different numbers, either 49 or 66 press releases. Alderman, you don't create jobs through press releases. It doesn't create jobs. You create jobs by working with people to try to have them locate in the city. Press releases don't create jobs.
Tom. I would agree.
And he mentioned 53206. And again, there's serious poverty
It's in Milwaukee
issues.
Central City for
Milwaukee Central City.
Right.
In 2011, there was a bad incident at State Fair Park with kids were committing criminal acts. And Bob issued a press release. And you asked why I talked about him in terms of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, of course, we know, has disparaged basically every ethnic group imaginable. Here's what Alderman Donovan had to say. And let's face it, it also has much to do with the deteriorating African American culture in our city. An entire culture. 40% of the population. I disagree with that. And I think it's Donald Trump-esque to blame all those problems on a culture of a race.
If I said that,
It's right
and
here.
That's not my statement. That's what somebody's fed you. But let me say this:
Fact
if
check it.
I said African American culture, I meant a subculture. And we also have to face this, Mike. Why is it that 80% or more of the victims of violent crime in Milwaukee are African Americans? Why is it that the 80% or more of the suspects that are arrested for these same crimes are African Americans? We have to, as a community, be willing to talk about these things. And I had met with Pastors United, a great group of about 40 pastors recently, African American pastors. And I told them, I know the mayor is going out in things like this and through his co-workers and whoever, his campaign, really spreading a whispering campaign that I'm a racist. And I wanted to tackle that head on. And I told these individuals, I'm not a racist. First and foremost, I'm not a racist. Second of all, I don't think I could be representing a 75% minority district if I were a racist. Thirdly, talk to anyone, Mike, who really knows me, and they will tell you he's not a racist. And fourth, I don't believe Alderman Joe Davis would endorse me for mayor if I were a racist, okay? Now, are there things that I may have some biases on? I don't deny that. And I think everyone in this room, if they examine their own conscience, would have to say, yeah, I've got some biases here or there. So the only way we can address those is by sitting down through dialogue. And I am willing to do that, and that is what is absolutely critical. But what we have so much of right now, the mayor won't even touch these issues. He won't even go there, and it's impacting Milwaukee terribly. We've got to be able to have the guts to sit down and say, this is an important issue to Milwaukee.
I want to move on. I've got several other topics that I want to get to here tonight. One of them is about property taxes. Mayor, I think since you've been in office, the property tax levy's gone up about 29 or 30% or so. I think the rate of inflation is 26%. But the question that I think property owners in Milwaukee have is that the best we can do? Are we going to be able to ever lower the property taxes in the city significantly? What do you tell them?
I say Alderman Donovan's property taxes went down this last year. They did. Your city property taxes went down. So we're making progress there. And it's something that I take seriously. But again, what we're trying to do is we're trying to deal in the system. And keep in mind, you got to keep remembering, he says he's going to find $15 million for the police officers. Every year when we put the budget together, we make a decision as to how we can best deliver the services for the city. With limited resources, again, the state has not been helpful here. We have done, I think, a remarkable job in keeping those property taxes under control. If you go back 5 years, the property tax budget, the budget that I've introduced 5 years ago compared to the budget I just introduced, it's actually lower than the counties, if you look at the increase. So we've been able to do that. Has it been easy? No, it hasn't been easy. But that included hiring probably 300-400 police officers. And Alderman Donovan said that's not enough. So he voted against the hiring of those. Now he's going to say, well, the people retired. And they did retire. But we put forth budgets that hired police officers because I felt that that was a priority for the city.
Alderman Donovan, you say on your website that you want to keep a keen eye on property taxes and fees. What would you do as mayor to try and drive down property taxes in this community?
Well, first of all, let me say this too. Not just property taxes, Mike, but we have seen huge increases under our current administration, 164% increase on our water bills, on our fees. That's killing the same property owners. So while the mayor has done a relatively good job on keeping the property taxes lower, although mine went down because my assessment went down.
Actually, your assessment went up, Bob. We checked.
Well, you are really doing a good job of checking.
I'd love to have your vote. On April 5th, I'd love to have your vote.
Wow, this guy has really been checking out my record, I will tell you. But 164%. We can't even, if you itemize on your taxes, we can't even deduct that from a taxes like we could our property tax. So,
is there a way to drive them down further, do you think?
Well, I think we have to prioritize.
Or given the fiscal realities, the obligations the city faces, is that not really
absolutely
possible?
No, I don't think at this point, for everything that we need to do, we're not going to be able to reduce that anywhere near significantly currently. Now, we do have to prioritize. The mayor loves to be able to do everything for everyone and continue the way we've done business for years. I'm just beginning to wonder, maybe we need to take a closer look at prioritizing and doing some things that we could possibly, through the county and consolidating and working on things like that. So that, to me, is what's essential.
I want to talk about the streetcar for a moment.
Before we get to that, because I have to talk about it. I just want to talk about,
quickly.
He mentioned the fees. He didn't mention the wheel tax. I think you were a sponsor of the wheel tax. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't like the wheel tax. I veto the wheel tax.
Then I need to respond to this.
And Bob voted to override the veto of the wheel tax. So when he talks about fees, we should include the conversation about the wheel tax.
Okay, now, this, folks, is why, and Mike, why I supported the wheel tax. I sit on the Public Works Committee, and every month paving projects would come in front of our committee, all deleted, because the poor property owners were stuck with horrendous bills, in some cases $3,000 to pave the street in front of their home. And they said, Bob, a lot of elderly especially, we can't afford this. I just paid $3,000 in property taxes, now another $3,000. So all of these projects were being deleted and not moving forward. The administration, Mayor Barrett, offered nothing as a solution to that. So I and my colleagues said, well, okay, we can save on putting this burden on this property owner. We can pull it off the property owner and ask all the residents who do own cars in the city of Milwaukee to pay that $20. Otherwise, Tom, if we didn't do that, and you know it, our streets would be in far worse shape than they are now.
Let's talk about
that's the reality.
Let's talk about a plan that would affect some of our streets in the downtown area, and that is the streetcar. This is something you feel pretty strongly about, Mayor. But Alderman Donovan clearly thinks it's a boondoggle. He thinks it's a waste of money.
I've got him down as undecided on this. No, just kidding. Kidding.
Here's my question. You know, as we learn more and more about streetcars around this country, there are some questions being raised about whether they are effective people movers, whether they are merely economic development tools. You've seen what's happened in Washington, D.C., where a 2-mile line is way over budget and delayed in getting into operation. Atlanta has had experience where they don't have the ridership they thought. When people say to you, do we really need to be doing this at this moment in our city's history with other pressing needs, what's your answer?
It is about economic development. Let me start out there.
More than ridership?
It's about both. And what we're seeing is we are seeing young people and people who are young at heart who want to live in the heart of the city. Again, I think all the criticisms, we are seeing an influx of young people in the city and people who want to have an urban lifestyle. And they want to move around. But if you look at, just to give you several examples, you've got the old post office building along the river there. That just went for $2 or $3 million over the asking price to a Chicago developer. It's right on the streetcar line. The Grand Avenue Mall just went for $7 million, more than it sold for last year. And that's a couple of blocks from the streetcar line. You've got the site just south of U.S. Bank, where we're hoping to have a major employer come in and create an office building. And that's critical to the streetcar.
Who is that employer?
We'll wait and see who that is. But we believe that this is important to economic development. And what I would say, and I understand that this is a controversial issue, what I would say is you can't name a major American city that's growing that doesn't have some type of fixed rail to it. I want us to be in the same league as those cities that are growing. Denver, Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, rather than Fresno, California, which is the other major city that doesn't have fixed rail. That's who I want our competition to be, because that's how we attract talent. I'm betting on the future of this city.
Alderman, you get your chance, because I know you feel very strongly about this.
I do, and primarily what concerns me the most, Mike, is how the mayor fought my simple request to have a referendum on the streetcar. Okay, yeah, I think it's a foolish waste of money, but that's my opinion, and I can respect other people who want the streetcar. But when you have something as sufficiently controversial as that, shouldn't we ask the voters? I mean, we voted for referendums on any number of other issues far less important. A $125 million project running down a loop downtown. I mean, this is a solution, in desperate pursuit of a problem. There really was never any desire from people. I would get calls from constituents on a lot of things, Tom, but never, my gosh, we got to bring back the streetcar, Alderman. Never. Crime, housing, street lights, you name it. Every topic under the sun, but never a streetcar. Now, if it's such a great thing for economic development, why don't you run it up the 30th Street corridor? They really need some economic development up there.
And really what we would like to do, and this is what I've learned from other communities, is, and you can see it from Bob's speaking here, before it's built, it's the end of Western civilization as we know it. But when I went to Portland, they said, this is what's going to happen. There's going to be fierce opposition before you get it started. Once you get it started, the debate is going to change. How can we get this through the 3rd Ward, the 5th Ward towards the airport? How can we get it up towards Bronzeville? How can we get it out towards the VA grounds? That's how it changes. And what I did...
Portland is the exception, though?
I don't know. I don't know whether it's the exception. I know it's working there. And what we've done is we've done a lot to minimize the utility costs. For example, the first numbers were $50 to $75 million. They just came in at $15 million. So we've controlled that. We've controlled that a lot. So I think it's an important investment for economic development in this community. And again, I understand it's controversial, but I don't want this community to shrink. I want this community to grow. And when I see growing communities, they have fixed transit. I'm betting on the future of this city.
Final word, Alderman, on this topic.
The bottom line, in most every city that has put in a streetcar, they have had to subsidize it tooth and nail. They have had to give free rides to people just to up the ridership. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, Tom. And I think I'm joined by the overwhelming majority of Milwaukeeans who feel the same way.
You mentioned education earlier, Alderman, and I do want to spend a couple of minutes on this. And this is one of these topics that people, sometimes say that's not really the purview of the mayor, that the mayor really doesn't have the ability to directly impact, for example, the Milwaukee Public Schools. But you do have the advantage of the bully pulpit. And Mayor, you saw the article recently. It was written by my colleague here at the law school, Alan Borsig. He had talked with Arne Duncan, the former Obama education secretary, and he referred to educational results in this community as a national disgrace. You are the mayor. It's your city. Education certainly plays a role in decisions people make about where they choose to live. What should the mayor be doing to deal with some of the educational challenges we face?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing right now. And in the audience tonight is Danae Davis, who is leading Milwaukee Succeeds. Prior to that, she led Pearls for Teen Girls. And the reason I mentioned that is earlier when we were talking about the problems that we have in this community, one of the things I'm proudest of is that our teen pregnancy rate in this community has dropped 54% since I became mayor. And it's dropped 54% because we've worked with community groups to address this issue. That's progress that's going to pay dividends for generations to come. It's about working with partnerships. Milwaukee Succeeds is the best opportunity that we have had in a generation to bring all of the different factions together to focus on improving student outcomes.
When should we see results?
We should start seeing results very soon. We've got it in seven schools right now. It's going to go to 17 schools in the next school year. It's going to go to 27 schools after that. And the focus is on third grade reading. The goal is to, in essence, more than double the proficiency reading rate for kids who are third graders by 2020. And what we have to do, and my wife is a teacher, this is all about helping teachers spend time with kids. It's not about suits. It's about people in the classroom. And what we're doing is we're setting up the infrastructure in both public and parochial and choice and charter schools. Because it's about economic development as well. We have to have our children doing it. So is it work that gathers a lot of headlines? No. But you've got the major foundations in this community who have all bandied around this as well. You've got the MPS system. You've got choice schools. You've got charter schools. They all recognize that we have to do this. Having said that, there are other schools that are doing great. Bruce Guadalupe, I see Ricardo Diaz in the audience tonight. They're doing well. Reagan's doing well. King is doing well. The language schools are doing well. We have bright spots, but I agree with you. We have to do a better job. No question. And I have been involved in this fight for a long time, as you know, all the way back to 2009. And I'm going to stay involved in this because it is important for the future of this community.
I want to follow up on that in a moment, but Alderman Donovan, you say we need to make progress with our schools, but how do we do that? What do we do that we're not currently doing?
I don't think we're supporting our teachers, our good teachers, nearly enough. I think MPS is saddled with a bloated bureaucracy that does not support the teachers. I think in far too many schools, Mike, discipline is a huge, huge issue that's not adequately being addressed. I think oftentimes this administration and MPS tried to keep the truth under wraps about what's really going on in these schools. It's a horrendous situation to graduate people from high school who can't even read at a third grade level. Well, yet those things are going on, and you're saddling that person for decades, perhaps life, to a life of mediocrity at best. So, the mayor talks about these programs, and he talks like we're going to make progress. I have heard this for 12 years. We're making progress, and then these report cards come out, and there isn't the progress. And yes, then you hear from President Obama's Secretary of Education, who says what he says. I mean, come on, where is the sense of urgency? Demand a seat at the table with MPS.
Briefly, are you a fan of charter schools, public charter schools? Are you a fan of voucher schools? Help people understand what you support.
Well, I believe anytime you can give parents more choices in the education of their children, that's important, okay? I want as many opportunities for kids to exist in the city of Milwaukee as possible when it comes to education. So I am open to all of those types of schools if, in fact, they're successful. We need to duplicate what is successful across this city, and why we continue to bus students and waste that kind of money. More money needs to go into our classrooms and support the great teachers, some of them really working on their own without getting the backup from the administration.
Mayor, about your role in all of this, and you talked about your history with this, I wanted to ask you this question. There are people who say that the reason why there is a turnaround district in the city of Milwaukee for some struggling MPS schools, and the reason why it's overseen by County Executive Abele is because it was pitched to you and you wanted nothing to do with that. Is that correct?
That is not correct. What is correct is when I first started dealing with this issue 8-9 years ago, I went and visited Mayor Daley in Chicago. And they had more success then. They've had problems since then, but they had more success then. And I said to him, I said, so how did this come about? And he said, well, I had a hostile Republican legislature, and they thought I was going to fail. And so they gave me the schools. But because they gave them to me, I was able to get the tools I needed to have them succeed. I was able to get that because they wanted to do it. When I got the call from the legislators that were doing this, I said, I'm going to hold my powder. And I did that because I thought, if you're serious about having this succeed, you'll have resources with this. And I said, you'll note that I didn't criticize it because I thought, I'm going to wait and see whether you're serious about this. I then got a call 5 or 6 weeks later saying, well, do you want it or not? And I said, I haven't seen anything. And that's when they made the decision to go. Now, I disagree with the notion that it should be the county because in the city, you have the same constituencies. The county, obviously, a third of the population are people who don't live in the city. So that's actually what happened there.
Alderman, if you had been offered that opportunity by the legislature and they said, we want somebody to oversee this district,
Absolutely.
You would have done that?
Yeah.
With no resources.
Yeah.
Does that bother you? He argues there was no resources essentially connected to this.
Well, we would bring the resources to bear and work with the legislature on bringing those resources necessary to get that job done. But yeah, I would certainly have taken that opportunity.
Again, real-time conversation that occurred was, no resources, do you want it? And you're saying you would take it with no resources.
I'm saying, you asked, would I take what was offered to Abele? And as mayor of Milwaukee, I would take what was offered to Abele.
This is interesting because it brings me to probably what's going to be the final question before we get to closing statements. We've got about 2.5, 3 minutes left here. And that is really about the relationship between Milwaukee and Madison. And I'd like to have you each address this. Alderman, you talked about the mayor, in your opinion, has not had success in making his case with the Republican-controlled legislature. Do you think you would have more success, and if so, why?
Well, I think I'm able to work with both parties, and I think I have proven that over the years. When there was a lot of talk back and forth, a lot of unproductive rhetoric back and forth, some coming from the mayor, some coming from state legislators, Republican state legislators. I invited them to my district to walk through the district and get an idea, because many of these individuals don't get into Milwaukee too often and don't realize the challenges that we're up against. So they came and we walked through, and the mayor joined us, I might add, at that meeting and met privately with Senator Darling and Speaker Boss. So I was happy that I was able to bring these people together. That's what's most important. As mayor, you sit in a nonpartisan position, okay? Because you have to be able to work with both parties for the betterment of the community. So without a doubt, I believe I can.
Mayor, about 1.5 minutes left. And the argument is, it goes something like this, that Tom Barrett ran against Scott Walker a couple of times. There are still hard feelings from some of those elections, not only perhaps in the governor's office, but with some of his Republican legislative colleagues. Why do we think that you're going to have better success in the future working with Madison if it remains in the hands of Republicans?
Well, we have had some success working with Madison. We've worked successfully with Madison on the Gateway project, which opens up the roads to the Gateway, right, to the lakefront. We've had success with them on the arena. We've had success working with them to make sure that violent felons who commit crimes with guns than have certainty in sentencing. There's 3 examples right there where I've worked very successfully with the Republican governor and the Republican legislature. But this city will not be served by someone who is completely silent on the residency issue. It's not going to be served by someone who is completely silent when the state takes $25 million for foreclosures that should come to this city and then turns around and criticizes the city, and he never said a word about that. It's not going to be served by a mayor who's going to be quiet and not say a word about the gun violence that affects this city and the guns that are here. I don't want to have a mayor who's not going to take a stand. Alderman Donovan says that he's someone who's going to bang tables and shout. He can't name an issue where he has gone up against this governor or this legislature. He has been silent on every single issue where they have been bad to the city of Milwaukee.
20 seconds, and then we're going to get to closing comments.
I don't think, Mike, it's fair for the mayor to equate the power, influence, and authority of one alderman equated to the power, influence, and authority of the mayor. There's a huge difference. Some fights, Tom, you got to do on your own. I can't be there always.
I'd love to have you on at least one, Bob. I'm looking for you on one fight, man.
I'm going to hold it right there, and now we'll have our closing statements. We have flipped a coin to determine the order, and first we'll be hearing from Alderman Bob Donovan. Alderman?
Okay, Mike, I think the bottom line is this, and folks, I don't believe the mayor has given us any reason whatsoever to assume that another 4 years under his tenure, under his watch, is going to be any better than the last 12. Matter of fact, so many of the major indicators point just the opposite. So, April 5th, this city reaches a crossroads. We have to make a decision. Do we continue to follow the empty promises and old failed policies of the past? Or do we embrace the future with optimism and vigor and vitality and create that sense of urgency that's so important? So the choice is up to the citizens of Milwaukee. I hope they make a good one.
Alderman Donovan, thank you very much. Mayor Barry.
First of all, thank you very much, Mike, for doing this. It's great to see you again. I love this city. I love this job. I get up every day with enthusiasm to do what I can to make this great city even greater. We've had some successes. We've had great successes here in the heart of the city. I mean, we have some challenges. We have too much poverty. We have places where there's too much crime. I know that, and we've been fighting that, and we're going to continue to fight that. But to say that we haven't made progress is wrong. If you look at the number of Milwaukee residents who have jobs, that's improved. The fact that the city of Milwaukee just received an award from the White House for signing up more people for health care on a proportionate basis than any other city in this country tells you we're fighting for that. But this job, and this is a job interview, it's also about temperament. It's also about character. It's about who's going to make those decisions. And Bob's had some issues. He's had some issues that we didn't talk about tonight, and that's fine. But he's had some issues that I think give pause to people in this community as to whether he's the one who should be leading this city. We need to have a mayor who's got the temperament to work with people. That's what I've done, and that's what I'll continue to do. And that's why I'm asking for your vote.
Mayor Barrett, thank you very much. Thanks to both of you tonight for joining us. With that, our hour has gone by quickly. Our time is up. Besides thanking the candidates for their time, we'd like to thank everybody here at Eckstein Hall, and for all of you at home, thank you for watching tonight. We will be back here on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock for another conversation with the candidates, this time for State Supreme Court. Justice Rebecca Bradley and Appeals Court Judge Joanne Kloppenberg in this room. For WISN TV and Marquette University Law School, I'm Mike Goucher. Have a great night.
Good job, Robert. Thank you. Pleasure doing business with you. Michael, good job.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
This has been a special presentation of WISN TV and Marquette University Law School. Thank you for joining us.